if it's not the son, if it's not Mujtaba, then do you have someone in the wings that you would think is possibly the next in running?
You know, the thing with the political and religious elite in the Islamic Republic today is that they are more cohesive, they're more ultra hardline, but they are, again, much less capable than some of their predecessors. There was a word in the 1980s, there was a phrase, I'll say it in Persian, that once the regime overthrew the monarchy and was purging a whole series of universities, political institutions, the measure of their purge was this phrase, which was taqwa na tawana, which was zeal, not capability. And the most important people at the helm of a lot of Iran's institutions today, whether that's the Supreme National Security Council, whether that's the parliament, whether that's the Guardian Council, whether that's the Assembly of Experts, these are not particularly competent or well-known individuals, but they are zealous and loyal. And it's this cabal of zealous and loyal that is moving further and further towards some of these most important political positions. So there might be some people who are very old from the Guardian Council or from the Assembly of Experts. The Assembly of Experts is a body that is designed to pick the next supreme leader, but you could totally have a moment where the person who is aiding to pick the next supreme leader, ends up maneuvering and becomes the next supreme leader himself. To this effect, I would look at an individual named Arafi, for example. Then there's, of course, the theory of a dark horse candidate that is really more of a mask or a veneer for this trend we've been seeing in Iran, which is the militarization of Iran's politics. Whereas it's not this kind of power sharing agreement with the supreme leader being the most important, but it's really kind of the supreme leader being a puppet for the IRGC. And they could take someone who just happens to have a black turban and really become more military or political force behind that individual. And in a way that the current son of the supreme leader has power without accountability, the IRGC too has a lot of power without accountability. So it's entirely possible that they just put someone there and expand their social, political, military, and economic influence. The most important X factor, of course, is what we haven't talked about yet.
If I could interrupt there. If I could interrupt there, I'm sorry, Benham. Again, I apologize for the delay that goes on. It makes us look like we're constantly talking over each other. But what they say is, never watch TV or sausage being made. That's an old TV production line. Look, if that happens, if the IRGC, as a result of Raisi's death, if the IRGC and then the supreme leader, once he goes, and they have to have a replacement. If the IRGC plays more of a role, if they become more influential in how that process goes, do you view that as better or worse in terms of the potential for peace in the Middle East, the potential for Iran to eventually move into, I don't even know what you would call it, the community of nations?
I certainly don't see the theory of the militarization of Iran's politics in the short to medium term leaning to either a more responsible government in Iran for the Iranian people, or B, a more kind of responsible, respectful Iran within that, quote unquote, community of nations. And the reason I'm saying that, even though there are a lot of people who believe that over time the IRGC could change, particularly if you begin to gut the Islamist veneer of that organization, is because I don't believe Islamism is a veneer. As much as there is corruption and pessimism within that institution and within that bureaucracy and within its veterans, there is still the origins theory. They are very much partners in power with the religious institutions. And they may not want to move as much beyond what they have now, which is the front and center. So people talk about a military dictatorship over time, whereas I think that is really already here. There is so much of Iran's politics that is militarized, but they're still quite content with this religious veneer, this religious front. The fact that it's these armed organizations and these Islamist organizations in partnership with one another, creating this arc of instability that is coming out of Iran and this vector of pressure against its own population that is within Iran. And that's where I wanted to go back to, because another really, really important X factor people should know about is whatever Khamenei wants, whatever the IRGC may want, it's quite clear that the population of Iran drastically wants something different. And even though there were protests historically in Iran for the reform movements, 1999 and 2009, starting in 2017, as much as people here in Washington, where I'm sitting, are kind of done with the regime change conversation, you've had large swaths of Iranians continue to turn out using every available issue to them, economic issues, social issues, religious issues, political issues, even environmental issues, foreign policy issues, to protest against the state and to signal to the world that their views, their values, and their interest is 180 degrees opposite that of the governing elite in Iran. So another X factor is what happens when there's another boom and bust cycle of protests, and it happens at a time of regime transition. And the reason I want to focus this point on for your audience is because with the kind of emergency situation the regime is in now, it's supposed to have a presidential, quote unquote, election, even though most of these elections, as we know, are really selections. They're tightly managed. They're pushed from behind the scenes. You've had diminishing popular turnout in these selections. Is that they're supposed to have one within 50 days. So I think about mid-July is when they'll have it. And Iran already had a presidential election scheduled for spring 2025. That's now canceled. And the individual who will win in the special election will be in office for 4 years. And it's entirely possible now, because Supreme Leader Khamenei is 85 years old, that whoever is at the helm of the presidency after this July could likely preside over the period of transition should and if Supreme Leader Khamenei die in that 4-year period, which is potentially totally possible, even though these guys tend to live long lives anyway. And in that sense, he could make the presidency, which on paper is not as powerful, into a more important figure and ride the transition into something else.